Hello and welcome to the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. My name is Nicole Brown. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to a special event. And this nearly makes me want to tear up to say, but it's an event that has taken nearly 20 years in the making. That's a long time. I mean, think about it. That's long enough for a child to be born and grow 2 years past legal age, or in the case of our featured guest today, that's long enough for Miles Coon, the beloved founder of the Palm Beach Poetry Festival, to turn what started as an annual poetry gathering in Delray Beach, Florida, into a nonprofit that has cultivated, educated, and nourished countless folks across the US and beyond to appreciate poetry, to write their own poems, and to grow into better and stronger writers. Since 2005, Miles has been tirelessly working alongside his team to bring America's most adored poet laureates and winners of National Book Awards and Pulitzer Prizes, all because, and here's the kicker, because he can, because he simply loves poetry. I've been the recipient of this generosity nearly every year since the festival's inception, and I'm certainly not the only one who has had a similar journey thanks to what Miles began. A festival, yes, but also something more than that. A home base where so many have found their poetry family. What's even more incredible to me is Miles's background. I mean, there's not many times you hear of a man with a degree from Harvard Law describe himself as a poetry workshop junkie. And never have I heard of a single person who was a trial attorney for the US Securities and Exchange Commission, a partner in a New York law firm, and a president of a manufacturing business for 30 years before he sold his business, changed his life, and used that time, as he says, to study the writing of poetry and to read. And as I hope he'll talk about in this interview, he also took that time to write. I've been blessed to read a number of his poems, and the slow and careful time he took is poured into them. It's absolutely evident. Another thing I'd like to attest to is what an incredible husband and father Miles is. He's been with his vibrant and beautiful wife, Mimi, since 1963. And he's even managed to bring one of his 2 children, Jen Coon, over to the dark side, so to speak, to write some pretty extraordinary poems herself. Miles will be joined today by Belgian-American poet Laure-Anne Bosselaar, who can bear witness to this deep history of the festival and the light it's brought into the world. Laure-Anne has been, along with her late husband, Kurt Brown, a major force to shape the earliest years of the festival, and she's served many times as poetry instructor and mentor as well. And as I'm sure you'll see today, she's a great interviewer and a good friend. Miles and Laure-Anne, I'm so excited to welcome both of you here today.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I think you're still muted, dear Miles. There you go.
Oh,
thank you so much, Nicole. What an introduction, right, Miles? I mean,
beautiful.
We might as well just stop it here and go have a cup of coffee.
I'm ready.
What an extraordinary introduction. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for the poet, Nicole. Thank you to the friend, Nicole. And thank you for Nicole, the person who has helped so many people at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival by reading their manuscripts. So thank you, thank you. Miles, because for me, because we're old friends, you can't make new old friends, right? So we've been old friends now for what, more than 20 years. I would like to speak to you, the poet, more than the director, but I cannot talk to you without talking about the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. And all those years, you and your wife, Mimi, and I have continued making newer old friends during these 20 years, during the many sunny Januaries, which is literal and metaphorical, at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. And we owe this all to your insatiable, and I mean that, love for poetry and your insatiable love to share that. You're a sharer. And maybe we have that in common. We just can't stop sharing what we love, right? So to start talking about you, the poet, I have to go through talking to you about the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. Just in a few words, how did that idea happen to you? And then how did that dream all of a sudden become this amazing, nationally recognized event?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Laurent. And I want to thank Nicole as well. That introduction, I'm saying, who's she talking about there? Anyway, the festival began simply because I was bereft after I left Sarah Lawrence, where I studied for 4 years. I mean, they let me come take the winters off for Florida. So instead of a 2-year program, I spent 4 years at Sarah Lawrence. And during that time, Thomas Lux became my mentor and good friend. And he actually said to me after I was about to graduate, he said, "What are you going to do now?" You know, and I said, "I don't know, Tom, but I think it's going to have something to do with poetry." Mm-hmm. So he said, "If you need any help, you know, call on me." That's so. When I got down, you know, we live in Florida, and there was, you know, there was really nothing here at that time. So I contacted a small nonprofit and asked them if they'd be interested in helping us do the first festival, which was at Lynn University. And I got Lynn University on board, and Poets of the Palm Beaches, and put them together, and ran all the monies through Poets of the Palm Beaches, which was a nonprofit at that point. Nice. We hadn't even gotten our nonprofit status at that point. In fact, Palm Beach Poetry Festival Inc. wasn't born yet before we had the first one. And we had quite an interesting faculty. It was only a weekend, but we had Thomas Lux and Billy Collins and Patricia Smith. And, you know, I mean, you think about, this was never done before. And we had a couple of classrooms that were made available to us. And we sold every workshop seat. We had 48 workshop seats. 48 people came. They paid their tuition fees. We actually made a slight surplus that year for the first year. And I said, this has got legs, you know? So that's when we decided to incorporate ourselves as a 501c3 nonprofit. And the following year, we moved to Delray Beach, Florida at Old School Square. And that's where it has been home ever since. Right,
right. And it has grown. So from a weekend to a whole week conference, and from 3 or 4 workshops to 8 to 9 workshops during
That's right. That's right. Amazing. And And we have people that come from all over the world, actually.
Really? Yeah.
Not that we have that many from foreign countries, but we do have folks. I mean, the first festival, there's a wonderful woman, Carolyn Glenn. She came from Australia to be in Thomas Lux's workshop.
Yeah.
And I'm still in touch with her.
Yeah.
This is what I find so absolutely fantastic, is that I can't believe that people who came to our first or second are still with us, and they're coming back year after year. And obviously they feel that the festival has been helpful to their work. And not only that, but they've made friends with all the other people who've come. And the poets that we have who've taught at the festival have been just fabulous. We get evaluations every festival, and so far everyone seems pretty happy with what we've presented. And for me, it's almost an honor, or it is an honor, to welcome folks like yourself, Laurent, who have meant so much to the festival, and Kurt and Tom, and literally dozens of other wonderful poets.
Fabulous.
So it's great.
I think, I mean, you're right. You're right. You invited, but I also think that it's the spirit that you instill in the conference that makes us come together as faculty and not just do our job in our little class and then leave. It has created this community, not only of people who return from Australia or from Canada or from Colorado or from wherever, but also the faculty. Once you've been at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival, there's something more to your friendship with that person. And that is you and Mimi, I'm sure, with the help of Susan Williamson, of course, right?
Of course, absolutely. I mean, it's the amount of detail, of course, involved in even creating the contracts with each of the poets that are coming. I mean, it's been particularly challenging the last couple of years with this virus. But I was
going to ask you, how did you cope, and how did you and Mimi cope also with this pandemic that came from nowhere and stopped everything in its tracks?
Yeah, well, it's
right?
Everybody, I think, in the world has been affected by this sudden and very, very difficult situation. And fortunately, we have viruses now that are being combated by vaccines that I think will eventually solve this problem or make it manageable, at least. But right now, it's still especially now in Florida, where we're the epicenter of the coronavirus.
Alas.
I mean, I think of, I think it was Wallace Stevens who said poets were like noble riders in their mission, which is to encourage people to express their own true feelings, and to stay the forces that divide us. And I really, really think that poetry, I know that poetry has made it possible for all the people who've come to the Palm Beach Poetry Festival and who've met each other and shared drinks together or walked Atlantic Avenue where so many wonderful restaurants are located. Everybody, it's camaraderie. It really is. And some of the poets, it's been rumored, have had parties in their own rooms. I mean, featured poets who invited everybody to come. I remember you and Kurt did that at Sunday House.
We did that.
And I mean, and for me, this is just joy. I mean, I don't know how else to put it. And Tom Lux, of course, was very, very important in the beginning because he encouraged me to do this. And I said, Tom, I need an advisory board because, we're brand new. So what's going to compel somebody to come and take a chance on us by teaching at the
True.
festival. If there's a good advisory board, it would help. He says, well, he says, okay, give me a few minutes. He got on the phone. He got a few people that you may have heard of, Billy Collins, and Stephen Dobbins, and
Yep.
Jason Chaudhry. I mean, this was Tom. I mean,
Yeah.
he was so encouraging and supportive and did everything he could to help us. And I'm grateful to him because poetry saved my life in a way.
Yes.
I had been in business, and an English company bought my company.
Yes.
And they at the last minute said, instead of running the company, Miles, we want you to be a non-executive chairman. I said, what does that mean? He says, well, you're an advisor. Oh, okay, that's fine. But of course, I discovered that the fact that you are required to advise doesn't mean that the other side is required to listen or seek your advice. So I was exiled in my office, and it was a very difficult period for me. But in order to maintain my sanity, I just started writing short stories. They kept getting shorter, and they wanted to be poems.
There comes the poet.
And so
Yeah.
I started running around to workshops all over the country and studied with Sharon Olds and with Tom at Sarah Lawrence and Martha Rhodes and several others. And I realized that this is going to save my life, because first time I sat down at a workshop table and read a poem and heard comments from people who I respected, it made me feel so good. It made me feel like whatever I had to say mattered.
Right.
And hopefully I could help others feel the same way. And so for me, workshops became magical and a place where I could be heard and listened to, whereas in my own office, I was not.
And you are heard. And here's the thing, is that often when a director or a publisher, for example, has that title, people forget or people don't know that. And maybe everybody doesn't know Miles Coon, the poet. And I'm going to change that. I'm going to have you read some poems. I'm going to have people not only hear you, but listen to you with their heart. And for example, I mean, where could we start better as having you read your poem, The Beginning, to start? So could you read the beginning?
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you.
The beginning. Before I had a self, I grew in the half-dark, half-light world I knew belonged to me. Two disappointing gods shaped me. Before I had a self, I was a topiary. Birds were everywhere in me singing while I stood mute. One day, the gods split this world in two. Before I had a self, I was taken by each of them to the great sea of disillusionment, thrown in from separate shores. My first self emerged from the sea, my body soaked in brine. I could taste my own salts. To be washed clean, to be naked and alone, to become the very brink you live on, is to bury your gods, as your heirs will bury you. This is Genesis, where we begin.
That's a fabulous poem.
Thank
you so much. And the gravitas and the humility that you put in that poem, I heard you, and I thought, I'm sure many other will also. And you have assembled a book of poems lately, right?
Yes.
Which is making the rounds. What is its title?
It's very new.
I know.
And I'm almost embarrassed, but I'm hopeful that it'll get out in the world. The title is The Quotient of Myself Divided by Myself,
Right.
which is probably a mouthful and a little enigmatic. But essentially, I kind of view myself, the self, as separate from me, the person.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'm in the act of dividing that self into the poems that are in the manuscript.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah.
And it's pretty. I mean, it is autobiographical in the extreme, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that it voices the concerns that almost every human being has dealing with life. I hope.
You know, hearing you say that, I'm thinking of another one of your poems that actually fits a little bit like a bookend, you know, a bit between the beginning that you just read, volumes, 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 and then you have that poem called Groomed. That's a very important poem, in my opinion, in your book. Could you read that to us?
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Groomed. I between their breaths, caught between their teeth, eating what they ate. I opened ears to them. They filled me up with words. Hers hurting, his slurred. I mouthed no sound, their lips hot and cold. I walk their steps, I fill their shoes, I take their leaves, with shovel I groom their graves.
That's a very important poem. And I mean, that line, it's so, you know, I opened ears to them. They filled me up with words, hers hurting, his slurred, the sounds there, and also the terrible metaphor and the beautiful meaning in all that. It's a fabulous poem. It really is.
Thank you, Laure.
Thank you. Thank you. Tell me, except for Tom, who is the teacher, who is the motivator, who is the friend, who is always helping others and always pulling strings for others. Apart from Tom, who were your literal teachers and who still are maybe your figurative, you know, the teachers?
Well, my first workshop teacher was Billy Collins.
Yeah.
That was a nice first.
Good first.
And I think it was Vijay Seshadri was my second teacher. Marie Howe at Sarah Lawrence. All of these are Sarah Lawrence teachers, but of course, in the summers, I took workshops with Sharon Olds. I was a Sharon Olds junkie. I used to follow her around with my tongue hanging out. I've got a poem for you. But she had these wonderful workshops that were generative, and she took part in them. So that I would, you know, I mean, she would read a poem after all of us had gone out. You had to do 2 poems a day, one in the morning, and then you go out for lunch and you were expected to come back with another draft.
Yes.
And so everybody shared these newborns together, including Sharon. And I'm convinced that she has a gland that secretes metaphors. And so she just was wonderful as a teacher. And so she had a cadre of people who used to attend her workshops in different locales. And so I was just thrilled and delighted to be part of that. But Martha Rhodes taught at the New School, and I was living in New York at the time. I got down there, and And she was really very influential. I said, I'm thinking of getting an MFA and I want to go to NYU. That's where Sharon Olds was teaching. And she said,
Yeah,
go to
yeah.
Sarah Lawrence. You got to meet
Yes.
Tom Lux.
Yes.
So she sent me in that direction, and I'm
Yeah.
forever grateful.
And that's why we're here, right? I mean, do you realize that? It's amazing how just one person saying something creates this amazing thing.
Well,
you also love Walt Whitman, don't you?
yes, big time,
Big time, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he was such a revolutionary in terms of
Right.
the length of line, the way he brought together literally every atom became every other person's atom. He was such a force for unity. And when I think about the world we're living in today, how curative Whitman work is, he's absolutely was one of my favorites. But I also love T.S. Eliot. It's also another great favorite of mine.
Another teacher, sort of,
Yeah. Oh, well, you and Kurt both have been influential in my work and certainly in the festival for years.
Yeah.
I think, Marie Howe, she'd take a poem and put her hands on it and see where it was hot and where it was cold. And then she would give me suggestions for revision. But I mean, so many of the poets that I've worked with and that I've studied with have been just marvelous and opened my eyes to the possibility of language, which, I'm still learning every day. I'm often amused by people who say, I don't want to come back to the festival because I've studied with 3 or 4 people. I said, come on, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
I tell you, I would like to go to the conference to study with your faculty. I mean, I'd like to come back every year and be in a workshop.
Right.
We never stop. And there's something about your work that shows that there's a gratitude and a forgiveness and an acceptance, and all these intense emotions play a big role in your poems. And speaking of love, by the way, you wrote a love poem that I have a particular affection for. And that's a love poem to your Mimi, our Mimi, if you will allow us, because, Nicole Brown and her wife, Jessica Jacobs, and I, and so many people say our Mimi, they're Mimi, Mimi, Mimi. And that love poem that you wrote to her, which is called You Draw Me, is a poem that is all heart and all gratitude and all acceptance. And for those who don't know, Mimi is also a very accomplished visual artist, and hence the draw. Would you read that to us?
Sure, I'd love to. It's an important poem for Mimi and I, simply because I was in business for 30 years.
True.
And it was very difficult for Mimi to understand what was compelling me to be excited about plastic garment hangers. and then when I would try to talk to her about her art, it came through as a businessman who really didn't and couldn't appreciate what she was doing. Of course, I guess if the subject was myself, then I understood it. So I wrote this love poem for Mimi. You draw me. I love to pose for you, be the center of your attention. All I ask is more dimension where I need it most. I feel your fingers, the charcoal scratch across my pecs, a dusting of my buttocks, the belly too convex. You smile when you tell me not to move, as if this moment of who I am were being captured on your pad. In your eyes, I see myself invented as I was in sex, and I am still, so still with you, you wild-haired woman of my life.
Oh, what a poem. What a beautiful poem. Those last lines. And also, this is almost a song. I mean, there is a rhythm and a cadence, and slant rhymes and off rhymes and real rhymes. It's just, it feels completely seamless and fluid. And I'm sure that you spent days and days and days writing it, right?
Oh, yeah. No.
Oh, yeah. There's another kind of love poem that you wrote, but this time to poets. That also shows your need to celebrate and your need to share and your need to express that companionship that we all have now, thanks to you and thanks to the festival. Could you read that poem to the poets? I love that. It's short, but it's mighty good.
Okay, thank you. To the poets. I have lined up my servants on bookshelves. I work for them. They serve me well. They welcome me in quiet, in tumult, even in death's company. They humble me. They make me in their imagery. I am their paper mache. Their hands are all over me as I reach out to them. I steal their songs. I am a felon on parole. They gave me life. They have pardoned me.
Oh, God, this is such a beauty, such a beauty. Thank you. They make me in their imagery. I am their papier. And you know, paper mache means, in French, literally, the translation of paper mache is chewed paper. And so the chewing of the paper of the poet, you know, how we chew paper over and over and over until there's a good poem on it. They gave me life. They have pardoned me. That is just a beauty, a beauty. And because we're in that lyrical moment, could you read one more and then we'll chit chat a little more? But I just am hungry to hear more of your poems. There's the poem, A Room of Approximations. Could you read that for me? Because that's another powerful poem.
Thank you. This is,
sorry.
I studied philosophy, and this poem is born out of some of that experience. A room of approximations. It's daybreak, white sky, early chill, the lake pines and birches still, like the frogs and birds. There's a line where the sky and timber meet to define the world. Yet in the lake, I can't divine trees from sky. The morning mist clings and steals details from the surface. If I walk down to the vague reeds, to the muffled sounds of frogs, immerse my feet in the minnowed edge of things, I'd still not see beyond my limited periphery. How does the mist, now tiny puffs, move and the trees remain motionless? Maybe I have it wrong. Could the leaves seek the breeze as the heron hunts the fish? Might this mist be composed of clouds mirrored in the lake's surface? How little of this world I know.
All those questions, right, Miles? I mean, how in this poem, the speaker, I'm going to say the speaker because that's what poets do. But you know what? I'm going to say you because I know that the speaker is you, and this is an informal interview. So may I just say that all those questions you ask are deeply intelligent, but they do remain in that negative capability, right? And you stay there. And how your unwavering curiosity constantly widens your work, right? I mean, the question is all at once elating and exhausting, but I wouldn't miss it for anything. And this reminds me of another poem that is very Luxian, but because I'm talking about Lux, I don't want this interview to end before we read one poem by Tom Lux, because we must read one of his poems, and then I'll ask you to read Role Play, which is very similar in tone and concern.
Right.
Right?
Yes. So you want me to read one of Tom's poems?
Tom's poem, yes.
An
The Horatian Nation. Yeah.
An Horatian Notion. Okay.
Notion, sorry.
That's
Notion.
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard for me to read these poems aloud without imitating Tom's voice, because I hear him, an Horatian Notion. I mean, I can't, but I'll try to do it in my own voice. An Horatian Notion. The thing gets made, gets built, and you're the slave who rolls the log beneath the block, then another, then pushes the block, then pulls a log from the rear back to the front again, and then again it goes beneath the block, and so on. It's how a thing gets made, not because you're sensitive or you get genetic lucky, or God says, here's a nice family, 7 children. Let's see, this one in charge of the village dunghill, these 2 die of buboes, this one Kierkegaard, this one a drooling nincompoop, this one clerk, this one cooper. You need to love the thing you do. Birdhouse building, painting tulips exclusively, whatever. And then you do it, so consciously driven by your unconscious that the thing becomes a wedge that splits a stone. And between the halves, the wedge then grows, i.e., the thing is solid but with a soul, a life of its own. Inspiration, the dunny, the gift, the bolt of fire down the arm that makes the art. Grow up. Give me, please, a break. You make the thing because you love the thing, and you love the thing because somebody else loved it enough to make you love it. And with that, your heart, like a tent peg pounded toward the earth's core. And with that, your heart on a beam burns through the ionosphere. And with that, you go to work.
I heard Tom Lux in you too. we all hear him, right?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
with that, you go to work. I don't know how he did it, but everybody was silent. When he started reading,
Right.
Everything went silent. Everybody was just all ears. And we believed it because it was believable, because he did it right.
Lived
and
it.
There was,
absolutely.
It was all heart and soul in that man. All
right.
heart and soul.
Yeah, loved him. I loved him a lot. And
I loved him too.
I'll never forget him. He's just absolutely the best.
No. And the energy that there is in this poem, there is something Luxian in your poem Role Play. And I love that because it's so unadored and flat out Luxian in its simplicity, but also its complexity, which is what Lux would do, right? It seems simple, but then when you think of it, there's such complexity in it, Yeah. And then I love, that I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to say when you're finished reading, one of your exclamations is so Luxian too. Could you read Role Play?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Role Play. I didn't try out for this. Didn't audition for the role of obedient son. But I learned my lines, moved, and said whatever the director wanted. Later on, I chose to play the student, college, law school, MFA in poetry. I armed myself in tweed, always books on my hip, a learned look, a hit. My part as businessman opened in New York, put me on the stage with my father. He played the lead, but always had the spotlight shine on me. My most ambitious and rewarding roles, husband and father, began with a grueling first audition, many callbacks, a falling into character, a wedding scene. Then, taking it on the road, we formed our own company and played out all the stages of human life together. Birth of kids, death of parents, old age, making its entrance with loss after loss after loss. Thank God for art. We worked hard at its life-sustaining role. We played with sound and images. Applause no longer mattered.
Right. Thank God for art. I mean, that expression, when I read that the first time in your poem, I went, yeah, that's it, isn't it? That's it. That's it. That's the savior, in a way, right? Thank God for art. It's such a wise and moving closure to that poem. And speaking of passing on things, I also do want you to speak just very briefly about the talent of your beautiful daughter. She is really becoming an amazingly talented poet. Who did you nudge her until she did it?
Well, my mother never liked the phrase apple falling far from the tree.
I see.
Her expression was, she don't lick it off the ground. And so Jennifer, for the longest time, well, she's a psychotherapist and
Yes, she
she's
is.
practicing
Very
in
accomplished.
Massachusetts,
Yeah, yeah.
and she's very, very good. And needless to say, in these uncertain times, people are flocking to her door because
Right.
she's extremely perceptive. And I said, why don't you turn some of that energy and some of that ability to see truth? Why don't you try to take a poetry workshop, for heaven's sake?
Yeah.
So she's come to the festival a couple of times, and she and I actually have attended workshops elsewhere. We made a deal, if we're going to be in the same workshop together, that she wouldn't write about sex as long as I didn't write about dying. So anyway, we kept that contract going. Now she's starting to write a lot on her own. She's joined a writers group. She's coming to the festival again. And so I've always been very proud of her and my son. They're both wonderful human beings.
Yes, they are.
With tremendous empathy for the world,
Big
for people
hearts.
in it.
Yeah.
Big hearts, exactly.
Big hearts.
So, what more can a man want when he look back on his life and you see the children that are coming along? It's terrific. And she's great. She's great. And I cannot tell you the number of hours of unbilled therapy I have received just from being in the same room with my lovely daughter,
right,
Jennifer.
Right.
Yeah.
What a journey, right? What a journey. And just before we close this, just are there just a few memories of the Palm Beach Poetry Festival that you'd like, that are just engraved, that will never leave you, like these moments where you say, this is a big moment right now? Do you have that? Could you share one or two memories of the festival?
I have a very funny one, actually.
Oh, good. Good.
It's Gerald Stern was with us, who is part
Uncle
hobo,
Jerry.
part rabbi. I love him.
I love
his work.
Yeah.
I really do. And my wife, Mimi, had her artwork displayed at one of the festivals where Jerry was one of our featured poets. And so I was so looking forward to introducing Mimi to Gerald Stern. This is going to be a moment that I'm really thrilled about.
Yeah.
So anyway, Jerry is standing there looking at the Mimi's poem, Mimi's work, and I take Mimi. I said, Mimi, I want you to meet one of America's finest, greatest poets, Gerald Stern. And Jerry looks at Mimi very carefully, and then looks at me and said, Miles, she looks just like your mother. Mimi then takes her hands and puts them on Jerry's face like this. And she says, F you, Jerry. Oh, I almost fell down. I said, this is perfect. This is what I've been looking forward to. And so he said, wait a minute. I want you to understand. There's a family resemblance between the two of you. That's what I was meant to say. Nothing about Mimi's age or anything like that. No. Anyway, it was very, very funny. But I mean, I have pictures in my mind of Galway Canal sitting on a couch in the gymnasium with students just filing in before workshops began. He got there at 8 a.m. and he spent until 9 a.m. every day of the 5-day workshop, and just was there to talk with students who could come by and chat with him. Magical moments when Carolyn Forche and Ilya Kaminsky made their first appearance at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival on the stage together. And she told that wonderful story how Ilya was in her workshop, and he said everyone was introducing themselves the first day, and Ilya stood up at the end of the table and he said, I write my poems for God. And Carolyn Forche said, well, that's pretty, thought to herself, that's a pretty arrogant thing to say. It only took me about 2 workshop sessions to realize that he did exactly that. And so seeing the two of them together was wonderful. It was just wonderful. Tom Lux's publisher, his daughter lived in Florida. And so Tom had written a poem, The Man Who Spoke Like Music. I can't remember the title. Anyway, I got his daughter to come see Tom after the reading. And so she said, Mr. Lux, I'm so-and-so. And Tom just, yes, Tom is a little bit expressive. He just hugged her, It was one of those moments I just said that was just priceless. Yeah. I mean, so many, I can't even begin to tell you
so many.
How rich and how full of love and support that the festival has become. And it's a privilege. It's just a privilege. I mean, I get letters from people all over who have been with us before. Dear Miles, I just got invited to read someplace, and my poems are being listened to, and to me, it's just, it's a miracle. It's a miracle, and I'm thrilled.
Well, it comes from you. You see, I mean, you and Tom had a conversation, and you say, "Okay, I'll start a conference, whatever," and look at what he gives back. And I want to thank you also, because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. We're a huge family, and thank you for those stories, and thank you for your poems, and most of all, thank you for your and Mimi's steadfast, thoughtful, general friendship. And here's to the conference of 2022. And as Tom would say, thank ye for everything. Thank you, dear friend.
Thank you, Laure. I love you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, guys, thank you so much. I love that. I was just over here just losing my mind. But you want to talk about loving the thing you do. Both of you make me love the thing I do. Truly, just this was a
you.
wonderful conversation, and thank you so much for your time today. This was great.
Thank you, Nicole.
Bye-bye.
Love you both.